Well, hello again. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go now. And right here. Okay, so we're on chapter 20. And just a reminder, she took up with a guy, Sam Goshen, and he was driving her and he wanted her to stay. And he tried to take advantage of her. And she ended up pointing her gun at him and took his horse. And she's going to leave it at the tavern for him. He doesn't deserve that horse. Remember, she cut off her hair, and that's what distracted him. The cap fell off. She was wearing a cap over her hair, and her cap fell off, and her hair, her shorn head, her shaved hair, surprised him. So she had an opportunity to grab her gun and point it at him, and grab her stuff and go. Remember that the ferryman was the one that gave her the gun and showed her how to use it. Let's see. Let's continue. Chapter 20. And I'm going to move this here so it looks like I'm actually looking at you. Hey, you. Whoever's actually listening. After I had put Goshen's horse in the stable, I found a room in the tavern. The floor was occupied by 4 women, so I had to sleep in a bed with 2 others, which cost me a shilling extra. I woke up at daylight, not knowing where I was. I had the feeling that I was unable to do anything. I couldn't make up my mind about anything, even getting out of bed. Finally, I wandered outside to the kitchen where a fire was burning and a young Negro woman was making cookies. She had rolled out a slab of yellow dough, enough to cover the top of a table, and was stamping it out with a tin cutter. Click, click, click. She didn't look up when I came in, but went on stamping the dough. I asked her what sort of country lay to the west. There's a big river over there, she said. I crossed it 2 weeks ago. How far? 20 miles, 25, I don't know. What's between us and the river? Between? Nothing but what's wild. Do people live there? None that mounts to much, I'd say. A red Indian or 2, maybe more, but that's all I saw. The woman put the cookies on a tray and stuffed them into the oven. They bake quick. Please remind me, she said. I'll get you a breakfast. She looked at me for the first time. She was standing on one side of the hearth and the firelight shone full on her. She was young, younger than I had taken her for, thin with light-colored eyes and a small mouth that seemed to smile without smiling. A description I had read before in the Lion and Lamb tavern flashed into my mind. It read, Negress wanted, 5 feet 6 inches in height, or slightly more, 22 years old, slender, 2 of her front teeth crooked, hazel eyes, soft voice, generous offer of 50 pounds for return of this runaway. John Clinton, Brandon Plantation, Edenton, North Carolina. The description for the young woman who stood looking at me. Should I tell her what I had seen or keep quiet? If I were she, would I want to know? It was possible that she did not. She did know. I thought I saw a fearful look in her eyes and then decided that it was the firelight casting a shadow. I kept silent. Where are you from? She asked. Long Island, I said. You've been traveling in a hurry or anything? In a hurry, yes. I don't ask why. That's your business. Everybody's traveling these days, one reason or another, in a hurry. I reminded her that the cookies were ready to take out of the oven. She gave me some and poured me a mug of wintergreen tea. The cookies had hickory nuts hidden in them. She said, have you seen me before? You act that way. Never. Her gold earrings glittered in the firelight. Ever read about me? You know, the notices they put on the wall sometimes about soldiers deserting and slaves running? Yes, in a tavern. Where? The Lion and Lamb on Long Island. That's how far? A day or more by horseback in the ferry. That's close. She had a soft voice and a slow way of speaking. From what you say, I guess I had better be moving. I've been moving since last spring before the cotton bloomed. I'm tired. Do you ever get tired? I wonder if they're going to hook up and run together. Yes. So tired you could sit down and weep? No, not sit down and weep, I said, thinking of Quorum and Ben Birdsall and Captain Cunningham and Sergeant McCall, the black-faced Hessian and Sam Goshen. All those people after. I want to stand up and shoot somebody. The woman glanced at my musket leaning against the table. I never was that mad, she said. Never was. She put the cookies in a jar, except for 2, which she wrapped in a cloth. She went to a cubbyhole next to the kitchen and came out with a bundle the size of mine. I'll trade places, I said. I never felt that way, she answered. I don't feel like trading with nobody. I thought about the wild country she had seen. That wilderness land, was it pretty? Prettiest I ever looked at. Lakes and water running, wild though. It sounds like a place you could sit down and not be bothered. You wouldn't sit much with all the work you'd need to do, but from what I saw, you won't be bothered none, not much. At this moment, as I stood talking to the black girl, I made my mind up. I was sick and confused and weary of fleeing, but I was afraid to stay in the village because of British soldiers, and I really didn't want to stay here. Whether they came looking for me or not, I wanted to be by myself. I would go into the land we were talking about, the wilderness land that lay between the village and the big river. I had fled far enough. So she's going to go hang out in the wilderness. Remember, it's wilderness. Uh, the 13 colonies. And then other than that, we've got Native Americans and it's wilderness. Remember, they go where they need to go. They don't build cities. So across the road, on to chapter 21. Across the road was a two-storied sundry shop. Not sure what a sundry shop, maybe like goods you need, like soap and that kind of stuff. Sundry shop, painted white with a sign over the door. Thomas Morton and Son. With the money I had left, I purchased a long-hafted axe, a scoop of flour, some sweetening, enough salt to last, two thick blankets, and gunpowder and shot. I caught a glimpse of a young man with a serious face peering at me from behind a pile of boxes. I guessed that he was young Mr. Morton, or old Mr. Morton had a square beard. He took hold of it with both hands and said that I must be new to Ridgeford because he had not seen me before. Is thee settling or passing through? Passing through? Northward? Uh-oh, he wants to know too much. I nodded, though that was not where I was going. Mr. Morton had cold eyes. They kept glancing at the musket. Thee will find heavy snows in the north. If thee will buy 3 blankets, I will make thee a bargain. That's all the money I have today. If you would care to trust me, I cannot if thee is passing through. I have the strong feeling that he wouldn't trust me, even if I planned to stay in Ridgeford for the rest of my life. I note that thee carries a musket, he said. Ridgeford and hereabouts, being peace-loving and God-fearing, I wonder why thee does. That is none of your business, I said. At this rudeness, Mr. Morton pulled down the corners of his mouth, but still kept his eyes on the musket. There was a sudden loud roll of thunder. Thee will need protection against the storm, he said. Seeing that thee is lightly attired, I can furnish a proper garment, should thee see fit to leave thy musket for bond. Thank you, I said, but I don't see fit to leave my musket. Mr. Morton grunted. It was plain that he felt he was dealing with a mad girl. I think he half suspected that I would up and turn the musket on him should he say more. Rain was beating loud against the window pane. I heard cursing in the street and a heavy wagon pull up. Must be Sam Goshen. Must be Sam Goshen, Mr. Morton said. He went to the window and looked out. It's Sam, all right. Stole himself a couple of cows on the way. There was a few other sundries I needed, but I paid for what I had. I said goodbye and walked over to the window. Goshen was getting down to tie up his oxen. I waited behind a clothes rack until he came in. Then I bundled up and slipped out the door. I crossed the street and stood behind a clump of sumac, which is a type of bush, and waited to find out if he had seen me. When he didn't come to the door, I went on. The Negro girl was walking fast, going toward the north. We waved at each other, I holding up my musket. Farther along, I stopped and glanced back, looking for Sam Goshen. He was nowhere in sight, but his little blue-eyed dog, asleep, I guess, was when I walked past the wagon, now came slinking down the street. He eased up and circled me and growled. I paid no attention to him and went on my way. The rain had slackened. I stood under a big maple tree and got myself ready to make a start. When I'd come into Ridgeford, I'd glimpsed the land in that direction, the wilderness the Negro girl had spoken of. It was a place where I would find good timber to build myself a lean-to, and game and wildfowl likely for the taking. What was more, the king's men would surely lose my trail, never believing that they would find me in this wilderness country. It began to rain again, but I started off at a good pace, though the bundle was heavy. I passed an apple orchard where there were some windfalls lying on the ground. That means apples that just fall. I picked up 7 of them, ate one, and put the rest in my bodice. There was no house or barn around. I climbed a ridge thick with pine trees and down the other side into the meadow wooded with maples that had turned red and looked like flames, as if you could stand beside them and keep yourself warm. It was near dusk now, and being tired and wet, I found shelter in one of these big trees. The faggots I collected were wet. That means faggots is small sticks to light a fire or use them in a fire. But by using some of my gunpowder, I got them to burn. There was a creek nearby with trout in it, which I could have caught had I remembered to buy hooks and line, but I wasn't really hungry. I was too tired to eat. Sky cleared and the stars came out, but at dawn, black clouds were rolling in from the north, and a cold wind lashed the trees. This is as far as I would go, I decided. Timber for a lean-to stood around me. I had water to drink and wood for fire. At the far end of the meadow, wild geese were feeding. Game birds were calling from the underbrush. Around me was all that I needed, and yet I had the urge to move on, to climb the ridge that rose above me, to walk on and on until Ridgeford village and all the villages and all their people lay far behind me. The temptation to stay there in the meadow was strong, but at last I tied my bundle together and shouldered the musket. I started up the ridge, but as I reached the crest, thunder crashed around me. Through swirling mist, I caught a glimpse, not far below me, of a dark slash in the hillside that might offer shelter. I stumbled toward it, sliding and falling and scrambling to my feet. The opening, I found to my surprise, was the mouth of a cave that ran back into the hill. I stopped and peered inside. I heard loud breathing, the sound of things moving about, then the clack of hoofs against rock. I took a step farther and shouted. Echoes wandered back to me. There was a moment of silence, then a rush of air and hurtling bodies, and a living stream burst forth from the cave, swept past me, and was lost in the mist. What do you think they were? Deer? Goats? I don't know. Ah, I had rooted a herd of deer that had taken shelter from the storm. Sounds still came from the cave. I ventured another step and shouted again. I crept farther and saw dimly a pair of foxes standing in a corner of the cave, staring at me in fright. I rooted them out and down the hillside. It was hard to see far into the cave, but near the entrance, I found a scattering of wood that someone had left. Using powder in my tinderbox, I started a fire. I sat down by the fire and laid the musket beside me. I ate the rest of the windfall apples I had gathered. I listened to the sound of the north wind and the rain lashing the trees. The fire made warm shadows on the dark stone. At last, I found a place to rest, I said. I was tempted to pray, but didn't. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So she's got some shelter in a cave. It was obviously big enough for a herd of deer and a couple foxes, so she'll be good to go. Hopefully no one sees her. That gentleman that worked at the store, Mr. Cockrum, maybe I think it was Cockrum. He makes me nervous because he was asking too many questions. And if Mr. Goshen's going to come in there, he might talk about her, and then they'll get to talking. And then if the British soldier and the Hessian actually come to look for her, who knows? They might pay someone to they might pay for information, and then they'll be after her. Like the one guy said, though, who knows why they would come after her, knowing that they've got a war to fight. So I did chapter 21. Did I do 20 and 21? Shoot. I'm gonna have to check it out. Okay, bye.